The 22nd of February, 1943. 10 years into Nazi rule, Germany's push to dominate every corner of society leaves no room for free thought. On a cold morning, the young members of the resistance group White Rose stand accused of treason in a crowded Munich courtroom because they handed out leaflets urging Germans to see the cruelty of Hitler's war. Instead of a fair trial, they face a scripted show of power. Each slam of the gavel, every shouted order, declares that there can be no resistance, and the judge's booming voice cuts off any attempt to speak. Still, the students, members of the famous German anti-Nazi resistance group White Rose, remain calm, refusing to betray their beliefs even as rage and scorn close in around them. The man who judges them and at the same time serves the Nazi regime in persecuting its opponents and who dishonors justice by his actions is Roland Freisler. Karl Roland Freisler was born on the 30th of October 1893 in the town of Celle, then part of the German Empire. His father, Julius Freisler, was an engineer and government official, and his mother Charlotte came from a modest background. The young Roland showed academic promise, excelling in school and displaying a particular skill for language and debate, which would mark his later career even towards sinister ends. When the First World War broke out in July 1914, Roland Freisler was in the midst of studying law. Patriotic fever swept through Germany, and like many of his contemporaries, Freisler volunteered for military service. He became a lieutenant in the Imperial German Army and served on the Eastern Front, where he was captured by Russian forces in 1915. During his time as a prisoner of war, Freisler studied Marxist literature and learned Russian. Upon his release and return to Germany in 1918, Freisler resumed his legal studies. His fluency in Russian distinguished him from many of his peers, and he completed his doctoral thesis in law at the University of Vienna in 1922. During this period, the German society was in turmoil. Post-war reparations, hyperinflation, and the humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles fueled political unrest. Various extremist movements took shape, among them the Nazi Party, led by the fiery agitator Adolf Hitler. While initially Freisler had no direct connection to the Nazi Party, he practiced law and served as a defense counsel in several politically charged cases, gaining a reputation for his fierce courtroom manners. By the late 1920s, Freisler's own political leanings took a sharp rightward turn. On the 9th of July 1925, he joined the Nazi Party, becoming member number 9679. He also secured a position as a city councillor in the city of Kassel, where his oratorical skillfulness and intimate knowledge of law earned him notice from Nazi Party officials. Freisler quickly became known for his fierce devotion to the party's message, advocating radical reforms that placed the collective will of the German people above any notion of individual rights. In his speeches, he railed against enemies of the state, a category that, in his mind, could encompass Jews, socialists, and anyone critical of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. On the 24th of March 1928, Freisler married Marion Ressiger, and their marriage produced 2 sons. When Hitler seized power in January 1933, Freisler's career prospects rocketed. The new regime demanded legal minds capable of rationalizing the Nazis' dismantling of democratic institutions, and Freisler proved more than willing. In 1933, he was appointed to the Prussian Ministry of Justice. He was in charge of the Personnel Office and used his authority to force out Jewish members of the staff. Later, from 1934, he served as State Secretary in the Reich Ministry of Justice, solidifying his role as a key figure in linking the German legal system with Nazi ideology. Freisler was among those who oversaw the legislative transformation that eroded civil liberties. These included the passage of laws allowing for indefinite detention without trial, and special judicial practices targeting political offenses, crimes that essentially encompassed all forms of dissent. Behind the scenes, Freisler advocated measures that destroyed the principle of equality under the law, replacing it with racialized hierarchy. World War II started on the 1st of September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. In the following month, Freisler introduced the concept of precocious juvenile criminal in the Juvenile Felons Decree. This decree provided the legal basis for imposing the death penalty and penitentiary terms on juveniles for the first time in German legal history. At least 72 German juveniles were sentenced to death by the Nazi courts. 2 years later, in 1941, when Nazi propaganda minister Josef Goebbels suggested to appoint Roland Freisler to replace Franz Gärtner, the Reich Minister of Justice who had died, Hitler's reply, referring to Freisler's alleged red past, was, "That old Bolshevik, no." In August 1942, Freisler achieved his most feared position yet, President of the People's Court, established by Hitler in 1934 to handle cases of treason and political dissent. Ostensibly part of the judicial apparatus, the People's Court functioned as a political weapon. It bypassed the established court system, ensuring that verdicts aligned with the regime's demands for harsh punishment of opponents. By the time Freisler took office, the People's Court had already condemned thousands to prison or death. Yet under Freisler's leadership, the rate of executions boomed. He boasted of delivering guilty verdicts in nearly 90% of the cases. And between 1942 and 1945, more than 5,000 death sentences were decreed by him. One of Freisler's earliest high-profile trials as president of the People's Court involved the White Rose, a clandestine group of Munich University students who opposed Hitler's regime through non-violent protest. Arrested in February 1943, the core members of the White Rose faced trial before Freisler. In open court, he called them as traitors to the fatherland, unleashing a barrage of insults and rhetorical questions designed to humiliate and terrify the defendants. The Scholl siblings, Christoph Probst, and others displayed remarkable composure in the face of Freisler's tirades. But despite their calm behavior, the verdict was never in question. All were condemned to death. Freisler's style of conducting trials was both theatrical and terrifying. He believed in using humiliation as a tool of domination, shouting and interrupting defendants, belittling their motives, and framing dissent as a betrayal of Germany's war effort. Observers noted that he often wore a blood-red judicial robe, thumping his fists on the bench while calling defendants traitors, vermin, or worms. The trials were typically rushed, sometimes lasting only hours, and defendants were given minimal opportunity to prepare and present their defense. Freisler's approach to justice was steeped in the Nazi conviction that the only proper outcome was total acceptance of Hitler's will or death. Criticism from the few more traditional judges who remained in the legal system was swiftly silenced or ignored. As the war went on, the atmosphere in Germany became increasingly desperate, and popular support for the regime slowly eroded. An ever-widening group of intellectuals, military officers, and everyday citizens contemplated the practicability of toppling Hitler. When, on the 20th of July 1944, members of the German military tried and failed to assassinate Hitler at the Wolf's Lair, his East Prussian headquarters in Rastenburg, the conspirators found themselves at the mercy of the People's Court. In the subsequent days and weeks, Hitler's security apparatus rounded up a large number of suspects. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was pressured to commit suicide, while others, including Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, General Friedrich Olbricht, and Colonel General Ludwig Beck, were immediately executed or forced to take their own lives. Many more accused of taking part in the conspiracy were brought before Freisler in the People's Court. In these trials, Freisler's reputation for cruelty attained its maximum. He alternated between mocking the aristocratic backgrounds of some conspirators and condemning them as cowards who stabbed the fighting soldiers at the front in the back. The courtroom was set up with cameras to record these frenzied proceedings, a form of propaganda meant to demonstrate the merciless justice of the Nazi state. While the People's Court had always been a form of legal theater, the 20 July plot trials fully exposed this grotesque spectacle to the German public. Freisler's scorn for the defendants was matched only by his devotion to Hitler. He not only dispensed death sentences liberally, but devised humiliating procedures such as removing belts and suspenders from the accused so they had to hold up their trousers. In some cases, defendants were tried in ill-fitting clothing, making them appear ridiculous as Freisler lectured them. The judge's thunderous voice boomed across the courtroom, reaffirming that no dissent would be tolerated in Hitler's Reich. Following the July plot, a significant number of officers, civil servants, and intellectuals with ties, real or imagined, to the conspiracy found themselves before the People's Court. Freisler presided in most of over 50 trials connected to the July plot. In a final vindictive blow, Hitler instructed that many of these condemned conspirators were to be hanged like cattle. Some were strangled with piano wire or hung from meat hooks. Even friends and family members of the conspirators were dragged into the net of suspicion, and Freisler's court systematically dismantled entire social circles that had once occupied senior positions in the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, or the government. Despite his unwavering passion in the persecution of opponents of Nazi Germany, Freisler's activities were cut short. On the 3rd of February 1945, 3 months before the collapse of the Third Reich, Allied bombers targeted Berlin in a devastating air raid. The People's Court building was hit while the 51-year-old Freisler was presiding over a trial. A falling masonry column came crushing down on him, killing him instantly. Some witnesses claimed to have found him clutching a case file of one of the defendants. In a grim irony, the man who had orchestrated so many death sentences did not survive to see the unconditional surrender of Germany, which occurred in May 1945. In the wake of the Nazi defeat, Allied tribunals dismantled the Third Reich's criminal justice apparatus. Judges like Freisler were either dead or imprisoned, but that did not negate the impact of their actions. Only a fraction of legal officials who participated in the Nazi system were ever held to account, many of them returning to their legal practice after the war. At least the People's Court was formally abolished, and its rulings were declared null and void by post-war German authorities. Roland Freisler's life illuminates a broader, darker truth about the Nazi era. That a seemingly modern state was able to morph its legal system into a murderous tool of oppression, all under the mask of formal proceedings. There were no tears shed for Roland Freisler.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.